He changed the gate code, told the neighbors I was just the ex, and put up a no trespassing sign in front of the house I paid for. I didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't even knock. Because 2 years ago, while he was busy signing gym contracts, I was quietly signing the deed transfer. So 3 weeks later, I showed up with 2 cops and a folded paper that said, "Owner Ms. Danielle Monroe, sole and legal. My name is Danielle Monroe. I live in Temecula, California, and for the longest time, I believed in building things slowly, with intention, especially when it came to love. 3 years ago, I thought I was building a life, brick by brick, breath by breath, not just a house, but a future. I met Josh at a real estate networking event. He wasn't in real estate, but he was charming, loud, quick to laugh, the kind of man who shakes hands with every bartender and knows which corner of the bar to claim. He told me he was between jobs, said he was figuring things out, but I had a steady income, a full-time job as a corporate accountant, and I thought love was meant to be patient. When I told Josh I was thinking of buying my first house, he lit up. He offered to help out, said he'd do repairs, paint walls, handle the lawn. It felt sweet at the time, and when he suggested we buy it together, I hesitated. But then he brought me coffee every morning, called me future homeowner, took me to tour houses on weekends, made me believe we were building a dream. So I said yes. He didn't have great credit, barely qualified. So the lender suggested something, put him on the initial title, but file the primary mortgage and deed under my name. I agreed. He signed the papers, I signed more. I was the one wiring the down payment, the one reading the fine print, the one who stayed up until 2 a.m. calculating closing costs. Still, I let him have his moment. The day we moved in, I handed him the keys first. He laughed like a kid at Christmas, picked me up, spun me around, said, "Babe, this is our castle." I believed him. For the first few months, things were fine. He mowed the lawn, painted the guest room, hosted barbecues. But then, the comments started, "You always act like it's your house." Well, I do pay the mortgage, I'd say half joking. But he wouldn't laugh, just walk off. He started telling our friends he was the one who made the place livable. Told people I just handled the paperwork. At first, I ignored it. But then one night, I overheard him telling someone at a party, she just wanted a tax break. I'm the real owner. I walked into the kitchen that night, heart pounding, asked him what he meant. He just laughed. "You're too sensitive, Danny. It's just guy talk. Relax." But I didn't relax. I started watching, noticing how he'd open my mail, how he'd move money between our accounts without asking, how he started locking the office door, my office. One night, I asked him directly, "Do you think this house belongs to you?" He smirked. "Why wouldn't it?" I said nothing. But that night, I scanned all the documents again, checked the deed transfer paperwork, confirmed what I'd suspected. The home was in my name. Sole owner, recorded, notarized. Josh didn't know. He thought because he'd signed one early form, he had rights. But the final transfer after the loan had only my name. Still, I didn't confront him. Not yet, because I knew, once someone starts believing a lie, they'll defend it harder than the truth. So instead, I backed up the documents, printed 2 hard copies, stored them in a fireproof safe in my parents' house across town. And I waited. I wish I could say things got better, but they didn't. He started tracking my phone location, snooping through my emails, asking why I stayed late at work. He became controlling without raising his voice. It was always passive. "I just worry about you, babe. Don't you think it's weird? All those meetings? Why did you need to buy a new outfit?" And still I stayed, because part of me thought maybe I could fix this. Maybe the man I fell for would come back. But one Friday night, I came home late from a work dinner. The gate wouldn't open. I punched the code again, nothing. I called Josh, no answer. I texted, waited, texted again. Finally, I walked around back only to find a new keypad lock. And a sign, bright red, private property, no trespassing. My name peeled off the mailbox. I stood there, stunned. Neighbors were out on their porch, pretending not to stare. I didn't knock. I didn't scream. I just turned around, walked to my car, and drove to my parents' place in silence. My mother asked if I wanted to call the police. I said no, because I didn't need a fight. I had something better, the truth. And the papers to prove it. The weekend after he locked me out, I disappeared. Not literally, just emotionally. I didn't post on social media. Didn't message mutual friends. I stayed quiet. Let him think he won. Because when a man builds a kingdom on lies, silence is the loudest earthquake. While he invited his friends over to my living room, I sat in a quiet office with my lawyer. Her name was Camille Ortiz. Sharp, precise, didn't waste a word. She looked over the documents I had printed years ago. She flipped through the original deed, the mortgage contract, the notarized transfer. Then she looked up and said, "You own this house, legally, fully, irrevocably." I nodded. But my hands were still shaking. "Danielle," she said, softer this time, "you don't need to prove anything to him. Just execute." I swallowed hard, because I wasn't just reclaiming a house. I was reclaiming a version of myself I had buried under compromise, silence, and pretending things were okay. Camille filed the official ownership confirmation with Riverside County that same afternoon. She sent a formal cease and desist letter to Josh, addressed to the home. I didn't even need to deliver it. That same day, she submitted a request for unlawful occupancy. Because as it stood, Josh was living in a property he didn't own, had denied rightful access to the legal owner, and had altered security without consent. That's not just petty. That's criminal trespass. But I still didn't show up at his door. I let the law knock first. By Monday morning, he had a formal notice taped to the front door. According to Camille, he called the county office twice, screaming that it was a mistake, that he paid for half, that he was there from the start, that I was just trying to get back at him. But records don't lie, and the deed was in my name, alone. No co-ownership, no addendum, no recourse. That evening, he texted me for the first time in days. "Wow, so you're doing this now?" I didn't reply. 2 hours later, "You're making a huge mistake. Danny, don't burn the bridge." Then, "I can fix this. We can talk." Still nothing from me. So finally, at 1:13 a.m., "You never loved me. You're just a bitter bitch with a spreadsheet." I read it once, then deleted it. The next morning, Camille and I met at the courthouse. We finalized the eviction proceedings and requested a scheduled officer presence for property enforcement. It was happening. Not next year, not someday. Next Friday? I had 1 week. 7 days to sit with every memory, every betrayal, and decide how I wanted to return. Did I want RevengeVault? Or did I want something quieter, a reclaiming without screaming? I chose silence. But silence doesn't mean softness. I spent that week preparing, called a locksmith, arranged movers. Not for his things, for mine. Because when I left that house, I only packed a bag. But the art, the books, the heirloom quilt from my grandmother, they were still there. I made a checklist, marked every item. Then on Thursday, I sent Camille a final message. "Ready." She replied, "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. sharp, be calm, you have every right." And I did. I had the right, the deed, the papers. And most importantly, what the truth. Friday morning was clear, cool. I wore a navy blazer, hair pulled back, minimal makeup, neutral flats. Not for him. For me, to remind myself I didn't need dramatics. I didn't need rage. I just needed to walk in. We arrived at 9:58 a.m. The sheriff met us at the curb. He nodded, checked his clipboard, and said, "You're Ms. Monroe." "Yes." He gave a small smile. "You've got the cleanest case I've seen this year." Josh must have heard the car doors because as we walked toward the gate, he flung the front door open. "Danny!" His voice cracked like glass. I didn't stop walking. He stepped forward. "Wait, what is this? Are you serious?" The sheriff raised a hand. "Sir, please step back. You've been served with notice." Josh's face flushed. He looked at Camille. "This is crazy. She's just doing this to get back at me." Camille stayed stone-faced. "No, Mr. Keller. She's doing this because you broke the law." He turned to me, eyes wide, mouth dry. "You're really gonna kick me out?" I looked at him. Finally, after all this time. And I said, "I'm not kicking you out, Josh. I'm just coming home." His mouth opened, then closed. No more words. He stepped aside as the sheriff motioned toward the lock. I gave the locksmith a nod. Click! The new key slid in, turned smoothly. The door opened, and with it, 3 years of silence, confusion, love, pain washed out like dust in the wind. I walked inside, the same rug, same couch, same faint scent of pine cleaner. But it felt different, because this time it was mine. Fully, completely, undeniably. Josh stood in the doorway as movers arrived behind us. The sheriff gave him two options: leave peacefully in 48 hours or have everything boxed and removed. He didn't speak, just nodded, then walked out the back door like a stranger. Which, in the end, he was. Camille turned to me. "You okay?" I nodded, but I wasn't smiling. Not yet. Because reclaiming something lost isn't a moment. It's a process, and mine had just begun. The silence after he left was deafening. Not in a sad way, not in a missing him way. It was the kind of silence that echoes through clean rooms like fresh air after a storm. I stood in the hallway of my own home. The same walls that once held my fear, now held space for peace. But peace, I learned, isn't instant. It takes unlearning, undoing, reclaiming. That Saturday, I walked through every room, not just to clean, but to remember. Each corner had a history. The kitchen where I once made breakfast while he scrolled through his phone, ignoring me. The guest room where we argued over his cousin staying just a week, which turned into a month. The office, my office, that he once locked without permission. I opened drawers, rearranged furniture, lit a lavender candle on the windowsill. Every act felt ceremonial. Like I wasn't just taking space, I was returning unto myself. But grief has strange habits. Even when you win, there's mourning. Not for him, but for the version of me that tolerated so little. I sat on the floor in the empty living room that night, legs crossed, a glass of wine in hand, just breathing. And then the texts started again. Not from Josh. From people who once called themselves our friends. "Hey, I heard what happened. Seems kinda harsh. Wow. Danny. He's devastated. You really blindsided him." Huh. Blindsided. Did they think he told me he changed the locks? That he gave me warning before removing my name from the mailbox? I didn't respond, but the old me would have written long paragraphs, explaining every receipt, every paper, every bruise that wasn't physical but emotional. Now, I let the silence answer. Because silence, I was learning, is a sentence too, and not everyone deserves your story. But one message hit differently, from someone I hadn't expected. Josh's mother. "Danielle, I'm sorry. Just that, nothing else." I stared at the screen, remembered how she once told me over Thanksgiving dinner he's passionate, but sometimes he doesn't know how to love softly. She wasn't defending him, not really, but now she was quiet, respectful, and that I could receive. I replied, "Thank you." The next few days were slow. I took off work, not because I was exhausted, but because I needed room to breathe. I walked the trails behind my neighborhood, ate meals in silence, reorganized the garage, spoke out loud just to hear my voice again. It had changed. More certain, less apologetic. One morning, I found an old notebook in a drawer. It had lists I used to make, things I want in a partner, dreams I'm afraid to say out loud, places I'll visit one day. I ran my hand across the page. So many lines crossed out. Not because they'd come true, but because I'd once decided they were too much. Too ambitious, too expensive, too unrealistic. Josh used to say that. "Babe, just be grateful. Why always more?" But now I wanted more. I started making new lists. Things I wanted in the house. Things I'd never allow again. Boundaries I wouldn't bend for anyone. I booked an appointment with a contractor. Asked about knocking out the wall between the kitchen and dining room. He said it was doable. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself imagine something big, bright, bold. I told him I wanted French doors, open shelves, natural light. He grinned, "Finally making it yours, huh?" And I smiled back. It always was. By the end of the week, I had a plan. Not just for the house, for my life. I enrolled in a design course online, not to change careers, just to explore. I signed up for a Saturday pottery class. Let my hands get messy. Let imperfection feel freeing. I hosted brunch for two friends who never chose sides, just showed up with mimosas and hugs. We laughed. We danced barefoot in the kitchen. They asked me, "Do you feel lighter?" And I said, without thinking, "I feel real." Because that's what happens when you stop performing. You return to the version of you that never needed permission. A few days later, I got an email from Camille. Subject line final confirmation. She attached a PDF, official county stamp. Danielle Monroe, sole owner, parcel 03829, clear title. I stared at it for a long time, not because I needed proof, but because the woman who once doubted herself was now printed in ink, on paper, under the word owner, and no one could erase her. Not with lies, not with charm, not with locks. I printed the file, framed it, and hung it in the hallway across from the mirror. So every time I walked by, I'd see the paper, then see myself. And remember, you were never just the ex. You were the one who built this. And now, you own every inch. 3 weeks after reclaiming my home, I heard Josh's voice again. Not in person, but through a voicemail left at 2:17 a.m. His voice was slow, slurred, sad in the way only ego gets when it finally runs out of people to impress. He said my name 5 times. Danielle, Danielle, Danny, please. He told me he couldn't sleep, that the apartment he was in smelled like mildew, that nothing felt like home, that I was cold, that I didn't have to go that far. I listened to the whole thing, once, then deleted it, because forgiveness does not require access, and closure that comes from within. I didn't tell anyone about the message. Not my friends, not Camille, not even my mother. I just stared out the window that night, one hand wrapped around a mug of peppermint tea, and reminded myself, you didn't ruin him. He ruined his own chances. And I just enforced the boundary. It's strange what happens after the fire. The quiet feels unreal. I kept waiting for a new disaster to unfold, for the other shoe to drop. But instead, life just kept moving. Contractors came to install the French doors I'd always wanted. Sunlight poured in like it had been waiting years for an invitation. I changed the light fixtures, painted the walls a color called bare linen. I donated the couch we used to sit on, bought a secondhand velvet one in deep emerald, something that felt rich, bold, unapologetic, like me. And then, one Sunday morning, I did something unexpected. I pulled out the old hard drive from my closet one I hadn't touched in years. It had hundreds of design files, drafts from when I used to dream of starting my own firm, not for architecture, for interiors. Colors, space, mood. Josh always said it was a hobby, that I should just be grateful for my steady income. But now, looking at those files, I didn't feel silly. I felt electric, like I had just remembered who I was before compromise softened the edges. I opened the files and started sketching again. Not for money, not for clients, just for me. By the following weekend, I had filled 3 notebooks. My fingers ached, my heart didn't. That Monday, I walked into a local co-op workspace and inquired about a design booth for the annual Fall Expo. The manager, a petite woman with silver braids and eyes that saw too much, smiled and said, "We've got 1 spot left." "You sure you're ready for this?" I smiled. "I've been ready." And just like that, a new chapter began. That week, I designed my own branding, printed simple cards with my name, a soft palette, and the phrase, "Intentional Living" by Danielle Monroe. It didn't have to go viral. It just had to be real. But something funny happened. People responded. Friends of friends reached out, then former coworkers, then strangers, asking if I did consultations. At first, I hesitated. Then I said yes. 1 client, then 2. Before long, I had a calendar filled with weekend walkthroughs, Zoom calls, color boards, and every time I closed my laptop at night, I didn't feel drained. I felt alive. One evening, after wrapping up a layout proposal, I walked through my house with a candle in hand. Not because the lights were off, but because I liked the way it felt. Soft, safe, sacred. I paused in the hallway, near the framed deed. The flicker of the flame danced across the glass. My name shimmered. And for the first time in a long time, I touched the wall and said out loud, "Thank you, not to the house, but to myself, for staying, for fighting, for reclaiming." Weeks turned into months. My life didn't become perfect. There were still bad days, annoying clients, lonely mornings. But there was also agency, and that, I learned, was worth more than any fairy tale. In October, I was invited to speak at a local women's leadership brunch. The topic was resilience through reinvention. I almost declined. Then I thought, if just one woman hears my story and realizes she's not crazy for walking away, then maybe the pain served its purpose. So I spoke, not with drama, but with clarity. I told them about the locks, the lies, the slow unraveling of my silence, and how one morning I simply decided to stop performing and start owning. The applause was quiet, respectful, kind. Afterward, a woman in her 50s came up to me. She had tears in her eyes. She whispered, "I filed for divorce this morning. Hearing you made me feel brave." I hugged her, not like a hero, but like a mirror, because bravery isn't loud. It's the whisper that says, "Not this, not anymore." That night, I got home late, slipped off my heels, poured a glass of wine, curled up in my green velvet couch. The house was quiet, but this time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was mine. Owned, earned, and entirely beautifully chosen. 1 year later, I received an envelope with his name on it. Josh Keller, typed, clean, no return address. I sat at the kitchen counter, holding the envelope like it might detonate. It was a Wednesday. Quiet. The sun was slanting through the French doors I had chosen myself. I waited 5 minutes. Then I opened it. Inside a letter, handwritten. The penmanship was familiar, controlled, just like him. The letter didn't start with "I'm sorry." It started with, "I've been thinking about you a lot." I almost stopped reading, but curiosity wins sometimes. He went on. Said he'd been in therapy, that he realized how much he dismissed me, how he used charm as currency, how he confused possession with partnership. He wrote, "You didn't just own the house. You owned your power," and that terrified me. Then he asked if we could talk, just talk. Said he wanted to apologize in person, said he'd understand if I didn't respond. He left a number, different from the old one. No threats, no guilt, just silence. I folded the letter once, slid it back in the envelope, then tucked it into a drawer I rarely open. Because closure isn't a conversation, it's a choice. And I had already chosen. I had built something, not just a career, a life. My design business was thriving, small but steady. I had 5 ongoing projects, a wait list. People trusted me to shape the very spaces where they laughed, cried, dreamed. But more than that, I trusted myself. That was the real win. One Saturday afternoon, while finishing a consult in Palm Springs, a woman approached me in the cafe. She looked vaguely familiar. "I'm sorry, are you Danielle Monroe?" I nodded. She smiled. "I don't want to make this weird, but I think I used to date your ex, Josh." My stomach tightened. But I smiled back. "That's not weird. You're safe." She laughed softly. "We only dated for a few months. He told me a lot about you." I tilted my head. "Oh." She hesitated. "He said you were cold, controlling. But then I found your name on a podcast and heard you speak at the Women's Collective." Her voice softened, and it didn't match what he said. At all. She paused. "I just wanted to say, you helped me leave, before it got worse." I blinked hard, because that wasn't just healing. That was redemption. That night, I drove home under the desert sky, wind in my hair, music low, and I whispered, not to anyone, just to the night, "Let them tell their story. I'll keep living mine." Weeks later, I received a city award. Independent Businesswoman of the Year. Camille came with me. So did my mom. We laughed, took photos, clinked glasses of sparkling cider. In my acceptance speech, I said something I hadn't planned. I looked out at the small crowd and said, "Sometimes, we think survival means shrinking. But the truth is, survival is expansion. When someone tries to fence you in, break the fence, build a door, then walk through it with your name on the deed." The room was quiet, then applause. But I didn't need it. Because that moment wasn't for them. It was for the girl I used to be, the one who whispered apologies before she spoke, who said it's okay even when it wasn't, the one who got locked out of her own home and still hesitated to knock. She was gone, and in her place stood someone, owned by no one, not even her past. A month after the award, I decided to repaint the mailbox. It had been plain white for years. This time, I painted it slate blue, and on the side, hand-lettered in gold, I wrote, "Monroe House." Not to be fancy, to be certain, to declare what was mine, what had always been mine. I took a photo, saved it, then sat on the porch. Same place where I used to feel like a guest. Now, I felt rooted, grounded, home. As dusk settled over the street, a little girl rode by on her pink bike. She looked up and waved, "Hi, Madame Monroe." I waved back, "Hi, sweetheart." And in that moment on that porch beneath that sky, I smiled. because the revenge was never about rage. It was about reclamation, not just of property, but of identity, of voice, of presence, and of peace. Josh's name faded. The pain dulled. The house glowed. And me, I sat quietly, watching the world turn golden. Finally, fully and forever, home.